Yeah, okay. Where was there? Oh. Yeah, she texted me already, you know, that in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
And that's so she said she was scared out of it. Oh, really? So let's get one. Oh my gosh.
We're good. We're getting back. I just have to join this back to.
It's never boring here, is it?
Or that the truth. No, it should just auto reconnect them.
It's all good. Everything's fine. Let me get my secular message. Those of you who have just joined, thank you. The webinar will begin in a few minutes. Please use this time to look at your monitor for the Q&A section. You'll be able to ask questions throughout the talk, and at the end of the program, we will answer as many as we can. Thank you. So, welcome everyone, and welcome to everybody who's joining us from home to the fifth lecture in the 25-26 lecture series, Revisiting the American Revolution, Part 2. My name's Bob Broncoli. I'm a member of the board of directors of the Hingham Historical Society, and it's really an honor to share this series with so many dedicated and engaged community. Before we begin, just a couple comments. Our new exhibition, Hingham in the Age of Revolution, is on view Tuesday through Saturday, 10 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon here at the Hingham Heritage Museum. We encourage you to make a visit to this exhibition, also to visit either of our house museums, the Old Ordinary and the Benjamin Lincoln House. And with a little advance notice, the staff there we can actually provide tea at the end of the tour. Now, Tuesday, March 17th, we'll join in the 250th commemoration of the British evacuation from Boston Harbor. Not being a native New Englander, when I first moved in 72 to Boston, and there was a holiday and I didn't understand what it was because my history didn't, history sometimes is a little local. So in New Jersey, it wasn't all about evacuation day. But anyways, we're planning a bus trip into Dorchester Heights that day. We don't have all the details coming together, so watch for information in the March newsletter. And finally, a brief note of thanks to all the people who joined us for the 49th Lincoln Day celebration, which was a snowy affair, but it was beautiful. That walk to Fountain Square at the end and the warm corn chowder here afterwards. Or the next day when we had Hingham High School National History Day here at the Heritage Museum. Both of these events are free to the public and are central to our mission at the Society to preserve and promote history, and we thank you for your support. Now it gives me really true pleasure to introduce Paula Bagger. Paula lives in Hingham and South Hero, Vermont. She served on the board of directors for nearly a decade and for 6 years was president of the Historical Society. During her tenure, a lot of accomplishments. Deirdre Anderson, sitting in the back, became our executive director. We purchased the Benjamin Lincoln House, I see Charlie right there, and endowed it. Not only did we survive a global pandemic, but we grew our operations. She also personally conducted groundbreaking research on two of the Society's most prized portraits, Prince Demas Christian and Henry Barnes, hanging in the room just below us. And just make sure you take a look at that. 2 years ago, we were in New York City, and they were on loan from here to the Folk Art Museum. And it was great to see not only how nicely presented they were, but from the Hingham Historical Society. An attorney by day, Paula opened her own law practice in 2017, practicing for many years at a national law firm and litigation boutique. She received the Society's Judith Kimball Award for Outstanding Service in 2024. That was a year after she stepped down as president of the organization. And this award was presented to not only to recognize her 6 years as board president, but also to honor the fact that she didn't disappear from the organization after her board service. Her spouse to Jim and proud parent to Leni and Katina, we're so fortunate that Paula chooses to poke around our archives and libraries all over the Northeast. Today's lecture is a result of that dedicated work. So please join me in welcoming Paula Bagger.
So good afternoon, and thank you for coming and taking the risk of being snowbound here by the time we're done. I don't think that's going to happen. So I didn't compose the title or the subtitle for this lecture. Whoever does the blurbs on our website, and I'm looking at Deirdre, probably did, but I'm going to lean into it and take an expansive view of my topic. Always aware that service is a loaded word when discussing the lives of 18th century Black New Englanders. I'm not a military historian, so that's, caveat number one. Also, another reason why I take an expansive view of my subject. But I have been studying Hingham's Black population in the colonial period and early Republican period for a number of years. I was going to put on something to make sure I didn't talk for too long, and I forgot to start. Okay. So, here we are at the semi-quincentennial, with interest at a high point in the experiences, choices, and contributions of Black Americans as the Revolutionary War unfolded. So before I get started, I want to thank a few people who were of great help to me in understanding, particularly the military careers of these Black revolutionaries. First, Ellen Miller, who with Susan Wetzel authored a comprehensive volume identifying all of Hingham's Revolutionary War soldiers of any race, color, or creed, and who has patiently responded to all of my emails, no matter how silly, as I started this program. I want to thank George Quintal, a scholar of Black and Indigenous soldiers in the Revolution, who provided valuable input on the military careers of some of these Hingham soldiers. And I want to thank Jim Conroy, who is finishing up his history of Hingham in the Revolution, which is slated to be published later this year. Jim allowed me a sneak peek at his latest draft, and it provided a lot of needed context for the war records of these Black soldiers. I want to give a plug to the Cohasset Historical Society because Ellen and George will be speaking there next month, and Jim will be speaking in July. So if anything I say today, what's your interest, you should check out the Rev 250 lecture series at the Cohasset Historical Society. And I'm going to go on one more frolic and detour before I actually start talking about my subject. And that's a little bit of show and tell and a big thank you. Jency Stewart of Marshfield recently made a remarkable gift to the Society on behalf of the estate of Gary Langenbach, and I wanted to show it off. Framed here together are 5 bills of sale for an enslaved woman named Dinah, born 1708 and died 1804. Dinah spent the last 50 years of her very long life at 757 Main Street in Hingham, the home of Theophilus Cushing. And we can't thank you enough, Jency. So, Colin, you want to do your magic with the screen share? Macs always make things more difficult than they should be. Are we in business?
Yeah, should get.
Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to start by introducing the 15 soldiers that we'll be focusing on today. I could have cast a wider net. I could have narrowed down the grouping. We keep discovering things every day, but this is today's group. And I loosely divide them into 3 categories. 6 were Hingham, and in one case, Cohasset, men who were enslaved, recently emancipated, or a not infrequent third category, kind of in the middle of emancipating themselves when they served in the Revolutionary War. You will recognize Hingham, and in one case, Cohasset surnames. These were the names that were used in the Continental Army records, and in most cases, used by them in their personal lives after the war. 2 of the men on my list were free Black men, one born and raised in Hingham, and you see the Hingham last name, and one who married a Hingham woman. And 7 were men who were recruited from other towns, other states in some instances, to help fill Hingham's quota of supplying soldiers to the Continental Army. Throughout the war, Hingham's political leaders were actively raising money from the town for recruiting expenses and bounties, sort of signing bonuses, paid to induce men to enlist in the Continental Army and fulfill the quotas that were imposed on the town of Hingham. So before we get into more about these men and their backgrounds, I want to do a 10,000-foot review on the question of Black soldiers fighting in the Revolution. When the fighting started, Black soldiers marched with the militia units right away, while the Massachusetts Committee of Safety and the Provincial Congress issued frequent and contradictory rules about whether or not they were supposed to be doing that. By June 1775, it became chiefly a question of what George Washington, the new commander of the new Continental Army, and the Continental Congress, who he reported to, thought should happen. They weren't much better in terms of consistency. Washington said no Black soldiers. Then already enlisted Black soldiers could continue, but no more, no new ones. Then saying any free Black men could serve, and then switching back to what I'll call the middle position, only the ones that were already there after the Continental Congress weighed in with its thoughts on the subject. The middle position was in some ways responsive to the very poor reaction of the already enlisted Black soldiers to the idea of being tossed out of the Army. And there was some concern in some places that they might then go enlist in the British Army. By the end of 1776 and into early 1777, the numbers in the Continental Army had grown dangerously low. And Congress had ordered the states to raise close to 100 battalions of soldiers to serve for 3-year terms in the Army. Around this time, Congress seems to have stopped telling the states how to accomplish this. Massachusetts began to allow the enlistment of any free man, Quakers being the last ones on the list of exemptions. They still were not supposed to enlist enslaved people, but the suspicion is that as recruiting got tougher and tougher, perhaps fewer questions were being asked of new recruits. So we're going to start in Hingham, and we'll start with some demographics. The population of Hingham had remained fairly stable, considering that in 1764, on the slide there, Hingham and Cohasset are counted together, are one town, whereas in 1776, Hingham is just Hingham. As had the percentage of Blacks in the population. As we'll discuss, we know from other sources that at least 12 of the 61 Black residents in Hingham in 1776 were free, perhaps more, but that was the floor. In 1776, that number was not 0, but was certainly much lower. Hingham's Black population was in line with New England's in terms of raw percentages, and Massachusetts had a larger percentage of Black residents than New Hampshire and Vermont, but fewer than Connecticut and Rhode Island. We can dig deeper into Hingham in 1776 because there was a census that year, which required the selectmen to report the names of the heads of each family, then the number of Black and white residents in each family. The indigenous were not counted. Hingham's return was that there were 385 families, and I'm using air quotes because that's a difficult term to translate into how we think of families in Hingham. 354 led by a white man, 28 led by a white woman, and 3 led by free Black men. There were 2,087 white residents, 61 Black residents, for a total population of 2,148. So one benefit of the way the 1776 census was set up, unlike previous ones, is that it provides us more information about the free Black residents. We can tell that 12 of the Black residents lived in a free Black-led family. Pompey Breams and Caesar Humphrey had been freed by the Barnes and Humphrey families a decade or so before. Peter Boardman was a free Black man from Boston who had married a woman from Scituate and lived in Hingham for a very short time. And here is my estimate of where they lived. Certainly not right downtown. Pompey Breams lived near the Cohasset Country Club, which was in Hingham then. Caesar Humphrey lived essentially at the corner of Ward Street and High Street. And Peter Boardman lived sort of somewhere near Wampatuck. The other 49 Black residents lived in 28 different families and were presumably enslaved, although as we will discuss, this was not necessarily the case. In keeping with what we have been taught about how New England slavery worked, most of them were the sole Black resident of the family in which they were counted as a resident. The 1776 census really tells us more about the enslavers than it does about the enslaved. They were overall the wealthier families in town. There was no particular pattern of occupation except that farming was probably somewhat underrepresented compared to the whole town. And one thing I did note is that families in which one member had attended university were highly overrepresented. And that it wasn't always the head of the household. It was as often or more often a son. And that tells you something about the accumulation of wealth over generations. And as we can see on this Google map, almost all of the families that had white families that had a Black resident were in the first parish. It's really just sort of the 4 in South Hingham, or along Main Street there. So I just mentioned that we are not always in a position to confirm that an individual Black member of a white family was enslaved in 1776. We also note when we look at the names, the absence of Black residents in families who we know historically had enslaved Black men and women. This was a period of great change. The 1776 census is a snapshot. Scholars increasingly reject the oversimple story that slavery was going, gung-ho until 1780, the Massachusetts Declaration of Rights, 1783, the various freedom cases, and then all of a sudden it stopped in its tracks because of legislative or judicial developments. Activity on the ground appears to contradict this. A 2020 study of Massachusetts probate records yielded evidence that the new state constitution, the freedom cases, did not meaningfully alter rates of enslavement in Massachusetts. Rather, slavery had been petering out from the late 1760s and particularly through the mid-1770s. The study concluded, emancipation in Massachusetts seems largely to have resulted from internal negotiations within slaveholding households and changes in attitudes towards slavery. This suggests that the Massachusetts story of freedom was a bottom-up transformation in social relations rather than a legislative or judicial imposition from above. An important aspect, particularly for our discussion today, of this bottom-up transformation was self-help by the enslaved. The author concludes, seizing nothing more than the chaos of war and changes in popular attitudes, the enslaved left their owners in large numbers in the Revolutionary period. And we see evidence of this in an unsympathetic letter written by Jerusha Gay of Hingham, daughter of the Reverend Ebenezer Gay, to her brother Jotham, who was in Nova Scotia. In the letter, she's talking about Ruth Atkins Gay, the wife of Loyalist Martin Gay, who had left during the evacuation and leaving her and her young son in Boston, to keep an eye on the house, basically. She reports on the many difficulties that Ruth is having, including that, quote, her Negroes have left her and taken their freedom, as the most have done in this country. So, segueing to the Hingham soldiers, and the reason that I sort of talked about that as we turn our focus to them, one of the more difficult and to me most interesting issues is how each of them navigated their way from bondage to freedom. We don't, for any of these six guys on the screen, we don't have a documented story about that. And so we have to form hypotheses from the circumstances. And just for fun, here's another, I like Google Maps. This one shows the homes of the six soldiers from Hingham that were six enslaved soldiers that we're going to talk about, and one from Cohasset. You can see Britton Nichols hanging out up there on Jerusalem Road. The houses at 201 East Street, that's Squire Cushing on this map, and 44 Pleasant Street, that's Prince Fearing on this map, are the only two houses that survive. So, in the spring and early summer of 1776, men named Squire and Britton, no last names, appear on the rosters of two Hingham militia companies assembling at Hull. And we'll start with them. Britton was enslaved by the Nichols family in Cohasset, and he appears on a service roster for, quote, military activities, unquote, at Hull on March 16th, 1776. So that's the day before the evacuation. And he was serving under Captain Thomas Hersey of Hingham's first company of foot, which was basically the downtown Hingham militia company. Britton was bequeathed by Nathaniel Nichols of Cohasset to his son in a will dated 1758. Nathaniel's son predeceased him, however, and by 1776, Britton had likely become the property of that Nathaniel's grandson, also named Nathaniel Nichols. And in the Cohasset's 1776 census, there is one Black resident in Nathaniel Nichols's house, and so that is almost certainly Britton. So the following April, Britton, now with the surname Nichols, enlisted for a 6-month term in a mixed Hingham Cohasset company under Captain Theophilus Wilder and Colonel Benjamin Gill. They were sent to reinforce the Northern Army and served under General Benjamin Lincoln, possibly participating in Brown's raid at Fort Ticonderoga, but definitely present at the Second Battle of Saratoga on October 7th, 1777, allowing them and Britton to witness the surrender of Burgoyne's army. Britton was discharged shortly thereafter and paid for his 6 months plus 19 travel days home. There was a lot of marching back then, because he had to go from Saratoga to Cohasset. In 1779, Britton Nichols re-enlisted for 1 month's service at Tiverton, Rhode Island, and North River, which in this context meant the New York City area, the Hudson River in the New York City area. He was compensated for his 1 month service plus 15 travel days for 220 miles making his way back home. Finally, in July 1780, Britton enlisted for a third time for 6 months. He appears on a muster roll from Camp Totowa, which for the New Jerseyans in the crowd is Totowa in Passaic County. There were other white Nicholses on that muster roll with him. He was discharged after 5 months, and his pay included the time for 250 miles going home. Squire appears on rosters dated June 1776, serving as a private under Captain Peter Cushing, the captain of another Hingham militia company, the one more centered around the Hingham Center area, and also Squire's enslaver. And that was for several days of military watches at Hull. After these few 1776 forays, and after the death of his wife Phyllis in 1777, Squire again enlists in the spring of 1778 with Captain Elias Whitten's company garrisoned at Dorchester Heights. This was for a little under 2 months. In December 1778, the selectmen authorized payment to him for this and the other Hingham men who were on that operation. And also in December 1778, Squire remarries. Neither the marriage banns nor the actual marriage record indicate that either of them is enslaved. We know Rose died, but we don't know when. But Squire Cushing enlists again in May of 1780 for 3 successive 3-month terms for service in around Boston, being discharged in early 1781. And I wonder whether that suggests that Rose had in fact died early in their marriage. So Caesar Blake, he got his start by serving briefly in Hull, like the other 2 gentlemen. He was 40 years old and presumably single. Caesar was, we think, enslaved by Solomon Blake, who lived on Main Street in Hingham. He had 1 black resident in his young household in 1776. Unlike all of the other the Hingham men we're talking about, for whom there is documentary evidence of the enslavement relationship, the identifying Caesar Blake with the Solomon Blake household is based on the name, the Hingham residency, and other sort of supporting inferential evidence. In any event, Caesar has the most extensive military record of any in this group. On April 1st, 1777, he enlists for Hingham in the Massachusetts 2nd Regiment, Colonel Bailey's Judah Allen's company, for a 3rd-year term. The muster roll for this company over this period include many other Hingham men, and you see a couple of them on the excerpt there of the on the slide of one of the muster rolls. There's Elisha Bates, Elijah Gardner, Thomas Hayward, Hezekiah Ripley, and more. Between April 1777 and February 1780, Caesar Blake was a very busy man. He appears to have been at both battles of Saratoga, also seeing General Burgoyne surrender his army. He wintered at Valley Forge in 1777, 1778, and he marched out of Valley Forge the following spring to the Battle of Monmouth. Caesar Blake returned to Hingham and immediately re-enlists, this time for service with a detachment of guards in Boston. The Hingham Selectmen's records from March 1780 show payment to Caesar Negro for his wages to Boston, as was reflected on the last slide, because it also says Esquire Negro, which is Squire Cushing. Finally, in the spring of 1781, Caesar again enlists for Hingham, this time in the artillery under Captain Amos Lincoln, a Hingham man. He becomes matros by the end of 1781. These were the guys who were responsible for moving around and positioning the cannons and artillery on a battlefield. He served until his discharge in November 1782, which is more than a year after Yorktown, so for quite a while. So this advertisement ran in several New England newspapers in mid-July 1777. It says, "Ran away from Elisha Levitt of Hingham, a Negro man named Pirro, about 5 feet high, age 25 years, speaks broken English. Also a man from John Fearing of the above said town, called Prince, about 5 feet, and it's either 2 or 8. I mean, it looks like 28, but that can't be right. Inches high, 30 years old, speaks good English." And so the suggestion is that the two of them left together, and they probably did. They had a number of things in common. Pirro, the younger man, in 1777, had been married to Dinah, also enslaved, for about 3 years, and had a 2-year-old son who he named Prince. Prince had been married about a year to Phyllis, also enslaved. Phyllis was expecting their first child. When the child was born, 1 month after Pirro and Prince left, Phyllis named him Freedom. John Fearing had purchased a 4-year-old boy named Prince from Hawks Fearing of Hingham in 1748. It is presumably the same man as Prince Fearing who left. So in June of 1778, Pirro Levitt enlists in Judah Allen's company, John Bailey's regiment. We've just heard about that, for a term of 9 months. And indeed, this was the company was still full of Hingham men. There is no indication, and you wouldn't expect it under the circumstances, that he enlisted for the town of Hingham. In fact, the record doesn't even sort of say where he's from. We don't know whether Pirro was with Allen's company at the Battle of Monmouth, which happened shortly after he enlisted. He otherwise had an uneventful 9 months in the Army and was discharged. Prince Fearing's a bit of a placeholder right now, because in the summer of 1781, a man named Prince Fearing enlists from Franklin, Massachusetts, for 3 months in the Continental Service in Rhode Island, in a regiment and unit that Solomon Lincoln's early history repeated in the town's 1893 history says had 11 men from Hingham in it. So another relatively Hingham-heavy company. He is described in the Army records as 37 years old and 5'4". So the age is basically right. The height may be off, although who knows what Elisha Levitt's advertisement meant. And the fact that he is serving with Hingham men 4 years after he ran away from Hingham is simply puzzling. So could be the same guy, could not. The one South Hingham man on our list is the unfortunately named Britton Whitten. In 1776, Britain was enslaved by Samuel Whitten, who lived almost all the way down Main Street towards Queen Anne Corner. Samuel Whitten died in January 1777 with a will that instructed his wife to free Britain upon her death and identifying real estate in Scituate that she was to give Britain when she freed him. His will urges her to do something about it immediately. I don't know whether he thought she was a procrastinator, but get it in writing immediately, his will says. He probably didn't expect her to live for another 20 years. By 1780, it appears that the widow Whitten had consolidated her household with a widowed daughter-in-law, and Britain, about 23 years old, enlists in a Hingham company under Theophilus Wilder Jr. To reinforce the Continentals in Rhode Island. Again, he serves with a long list of Hingham men. And in 1782, he served a 1-month term in Hull, again with a list of Hingham men. And in both instances, I never moved it forward to, well, I moved it the wrong way. That's why there's Britain Whitten. In both instances, the town of Hingham made payment, and there's references in the selectmen's records to payment to Britain and the other Hingham men for this service in 1780 and 1782. So, what about the freemen? Cromwell Barnes was the eldest son of Pompey Breams and his wife Phyllis, who we mentioned, the free black couple who lived up near the Cohasset Golf Club. He spent most of his teen years and adult life moving back and forth between Hingham and Boston, and was at different points identified as a barber, a peruke maker, which means a wig maker, and a mariner. He was literate. And I include on his, I'm not advancing my slides very well, am I? And I'm including on his slide a receipt that he wrote because it's the only example of a writing by any of these men that I have found. He served 2 six-month terms in the Continental Army, enlisting from Boston. He was single and anywhere from 16 to 22, depending on whether you believe the Army or the records of First Parish in Hingham, which recorded his death in 1802. A muster roll indicates that he too went to Totowa, New Jersey, and may have gone to Rhode Island for a second enlistment. So Fortunatus Sims, he had an exciting time. He served as a cook on the brig Hazard from November 1778 until it was captured with the rest of the Massachusetts Navy at Penobscot in the summer of 1779. He made his way to Hingham and married Emma Thaxter, who had grown up enslaved by the John Thaxter family at 70 South Street. That's the community center. Did he already know Hingham when he left Maine to head south, or did he just go along with any of the many Hingham men who served on the Hazard? And there were a lot of them. After marrying Emma in December 1779, he enlisted on the frigate Protector, again as a cook, and served on it until it was captured in May of 1781. There were some good times, though, and I included them in the pictures. He was present when the Hazard took the active in the West Indies, a well-known naval event of the Revolution in March 1779, and also when the frigate Protector defeated the Admiral Duff in June of 1780. Again, these are important enough that, people are painting pictures of them. But on the other hand, his discharge in 1781 notes that he is being paid not only for service, but also for the time he spent in captivity with the enemy after the protector was taken. And his son was born and died in 1780 in Hingham while he was away. So the last category are men not from Hingham. Did I go the wrong way again? Oh, I'm very bad at that. The last category, keep doing that, Ellen. She's going like this. The last category are men not from Hingham, recruited to serve and help meet Hingham's quotas. So the town's financial records during the Revolution are full of the struggles taken to recruit and provide the Continental Army soldiers to enlist for 3-year terms to fight the war. And you can see why your average Hingham farmer did not consider himself in a position, probably no matter how patriotic he was, to up and leave his farm, and his family for 3 years. So it was a tough row to hoe to recruit these men. This was done through taxation. And as reflected on this document, what appears to be a subscription by various Hingham townsfolk in amounts commensurate with their means to raise the money to fund a single continental position. It was not only expensive to recruit these soldiers, but it was intensely competitive. Plato McClellan, who we'll talk about briefly, enlisted for Hingham in 1777, and Falmouth, Maine, claimed that he had enlisted for them, and there was a dispute that needed to be resolved. Hingham won, and so Plato McClellan was counted as a Hingham soldier. The record for Caesar Scott, which is very complicated, and Ellen Miller helped me parse through it, but it shows that he was recruited for Hingham for 3 years, but then possibly got poached by the town of Chesterfield out in Western Mass, because all of a sudden he's on a 3-year term for the town of Chesterfield, shortly after he was signed up for Hingham. Unfortunately, Mr. Scott was killed, and so I guess it never really got resolved. I don't think he was killed because of that. I think that he probably got sick. So in the spring of 1777, which was one time when there was, one of these more aggressive recruiting situations going on because of the quotas assigned to the town, Plato McClellan and Joseph Falmouth both enlisted for a 3-year term in the Continental Army, and their service credited to Hingham. Plato's after an appeals process. Both were from Falmouth, Maine. This is not the Cape. And McClellan had been enslaved by a man named Carey McClellan. We don't know about Joseph Falmouth's status, but the last name is suggestive. After he completed his 3-year term, Joseph Falmouth, he re-enlisted for another 3-year term with another town. In early 1781, Fortune Freeman, Jack Freeman, and Juba Freeman all enlisted for a 3-year term in the Continental Army, were paid a bounty by the town of Hingham and counted as Hingham soldiers. Fortune Freeman and Jack Freeman were coming off of 3-year enlistments for another town, so they were going on years 4 through 6 of being Revolutionary soldiers. So these men saw a great deal of action. Plato McClellan was at Saratoga and Valley Forge. Joseph Falmouth was on the Sullivan expedition, which was out to the Iroquois in western New York State and was a very bloody business. And during his successor appointment for another town was at Yorktown. Fortune Freeman, and I put his pension application up there on the slide. He states that over multiple enlistments, he was at Saratoga, Brandywine, where he was injured, wounded in the thigh, Monmouth, and Yorktown. So I put together this chart that shows the enlistments of the various gentlemen we've been talking about. The pink are the Hingham Cohasset enslaved or formerly enslaved men. The blue are the free Hingham men, and the green are the soldiers who were hired to fill a quota. The dotted lines for the green fellows means time they served, but for another town, not for Hingham. So the DAR's Forgotten Patriots Project estimates that 1,700 of the 68,000 Massachusetts soldiers who fought in the Revolution were men of color. That adds up to about 2.5%. But some scholars have noted that this might be the wrong way to assess the Black contribution to the Patriot forces. White men, they say, were more likely to want to return home to plant their fields and were more likely to go for a 3 or 6 month enlistment in the Army. Recently emancipated or self-emancipated men often didn't have fields or families to go home to, and they certainly had much less attractive alternate job prospects in front of them. They were more likely to sign up for a lengthy enlistment, to sign up for multiple enlistments, and some say less likely to desert. Oh dear. Less likely to desert. And none of this is a value judgment, not saying that a lot of white men didn't also sign up for 3-year terms, not saying that white men, were deserters, just saying that the economic realities of the families of these soldiers perhaps made a difference, and another way of looking at the relative, if you did it by hours served or something, you might come up with a different number. So what I thought was interesting, so I plugged this in. The soldiers who were hired for Hingham certainly support that thesis, right? They're long timers. Caesar Scott died, and Lewis Freeman at the bottom is complicated. I don't have a good way of really getting his full record. But other than Caesar Blake, who was just in it, the whole time, the records of the other Hingham Cohasset men look more like what these scholars are saying, the white farmers approach. I don't have a point to make here. I just wanted to see what would happen if I plugged it all in. I mean, I do notice, and we'll notice that Squire, Pirro, Prince, and probably Britton Nichols were married with families themselves, even if they didn't have farms. And Squire and Britton were not young men. So just interesting to me, no particular result that I'm going to announce. Oh, geez. I do need to say a couple of quick words about Juba Freeman, who was recruited to serve in the Continental Army on behalf of Hingham in February 1781. In early 1781, Benjamin Lincoln was in Hingham, having just been exchanged as a POW after the disaster at Charleston, and could get back in Charleston, and could get back in the game. He was tasked by General Washington with leading recruitment efforts in Massachusetts. And one of his recruits was handled in a very different way. And while we only have partial documentation, it appears that what happened is that he purchased an enslaved man from Boston distiller Henry Hill and immediately freed him, manumitted him, on the condition that he enlist in the Continental Army for 3 years. Juba was to turn his bounty, his signing bonus, and any of his pay over to General Lincoln, who in turn said he would make sure that he got clothing, food, expenses paid. The obvious inference of this is that Juba, while enlisting it as a private in the Army, would serve General Lincoln personally. Juba doesn't appear in any further rolls or regimental lists, likely because he was not fighting, but rather attending General Lincoln, and he was not being paid. We do know that after Yorktown, he accompanied General Lincoln to Philadelphia, where Lincoln had been appointed the Secretary at War under the Articles of Confederation, and so it was at a desk job. And Juba pops up in Boston and Hingham in the early 1780s, still working for the general, although he drops out of the Lincoln orbit by 1784, which coincidentally is when his agreed upon 3 years of work in exchange for General Lincoln purchasing his freedom would have been up. A lot more to unpack there, but it's an interesting story. And one thing that brings it home is that there's a story that was handed down over the years in the families that lived at the Benjamin Lincoln House about this remarkably preserved, remarkable because it was preserved, room built into the southeast corner of the attic of the General Benjamin Lincoln House. The family called it Robert's Room. And that was because the family story had been that a Black soldier returned from the war with the general and lived in this room for some period of time. When the Hingham Historical Society purchased the Benjamin Lincoln House, one of the first things we did was jump right on to researching Robert. And of course, what we found out was that Robert existed, but he was a man named Robert Franks, a free Black man who worked for the Lincolns in the 1790s and aughts of the 1800s. He was a married man and he lived out. He lived over in the Tuttleville neighborhood. But the more we learn about Juba, I at least suspect that the family legend was one that had a solid seed of truth, as so many family legends do, although the facts became tangled over time with this other man, Robert, who presumably some of the 19th century Lincolns knew and remembered. And because it appears that a Black soldier did return with Lincoln from the war and appears to have stayed with the family for a short period of time. So I'm suggesting that this is probably, in fact, Juba's room in the attic of the Benjamin Lincoln House. So do I have time to give you? I'll be fast. Thought you might want the epilogue, what happened to some of these people. Britton Nichols moved to Hingham after the war with his wife and Phoebe and daughter Nancy. He's said to have opened a shop on North Street, and he died in 1810. Squire Cushing lived in Hingham for a while. He was taxed on property on North Street in the early 1780s. After his second wife's death, at some point, he moved to Boston and remarried. We don't have a date of death for him. Britton Whitten, we don't know if he ever got the land in Scituate that he was supposed to get. A Britton Whitting is buried in Hanover. If this is R. Britton, he died in 1838, aged 81. Fortunatus Sims, after his first wife, Emma Thaxter, died, and after she died in 1785, I think. So after that, he moved to Boston, remarried, and had 6 children. He died of consumption in 1813, age 72. Caesar Blake may have returned to Hingham. In fact, we know he did return to Hingham for a while. We know nothing else except that in the 1790 federal census, Solomon Blake's house still has 1 Black resident. Cromwell Barnes married twice after the war, continued to live back and forth between Boston and Hingham. He bought and sold a great deal of real estate in Hingham, a lot of it on Beacon Hill, which was the lower part of the hill was the Black neighborhood in Boston at the time. His sons John and Cromwell were born in Hingham, and he died in 1802. His estate was insolvent. Pero Levitt appears to have returned to Hingham and gone to work for his former enslaver, Elisha Levitt, at the firm of Levitt and Rice. Prince Fearing may have returned to Hingham. There is a prince that died in 1786. His son Freedom did live his entire life in Hingham, employed as a hostler, marrying and having 3 children. Freedom was an early member of the New North Church over at Fountain Square. So that's all I got.
Thank you so much.
No, I know what I did. That's good.
Well, thank you so much, Paula.
Oh, can you do the, after you do that? List of things for Colin to do.
All right, mics are on.
Thank you, Colin.
They should be in a second.
Stop soon.
Yeah. I might.
Thank you, Colin.
Stop here?
I can stop it.
Apparently I can't. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Colin. And thank you so much, Paula, for all that new knowledge and
Listening.
hours and hours of that detailed research. Does anybody have any questions in our in-person audience as well as our at-home audience? Jim first.
In Scituate, the African Americans who came back from the war hung around with each other. They had a community in what today is Mount Hope area in Norwell. Asher Freeman was kind of the ringmaster, and he got a couple of other friends who he met in the Army who lived out in what today is Adams, and they came to that Mount Hope area in Norwell. So I don't know what the relationship was, if any, between the blacks who came back to Hingham after the war.
It's hard to say. I think, as you could tell by my little epilogue, not that many came back to stick. Most of them seem to have gone into Boston. It is the case that in the 1790 census, Hingham's Black population had gone down, And then it rose again in the 1800 and 1810 censuses. So that's not a good answer on any of that. I was going to scoop Asher Friedman because his descendants, some of them live in Hingham, but I decided that wasn't fair.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Paula. We have a couple questions from our online audience.
One question and one comment. Eileen McIntyre says, awesome, amazing research to you. Thank you. And Connie Crosby, Connie Crosby asks, says, first of all, wonderful talk. And then any info on Plato McLennan after the war?
And I only read this in Ellen's book that he wound up in Portland, where he died in the 1820s, I believe. I didn't really trace those guys as hard because I was already bumping up on my time.
Okay, great. I have a question, two questions in here.
I was just wondering if you found any evidence of the Hingham Black people enlisting with the British Army.
Did not find any. There were several men who fought for Hingham in the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, and of course we were the British then, but that's the closest I found.
Thank you.
Actually, I was going to ask the very same question that this lady asked. So my question was thinking, was it just the people that were in Boston, the blacks that were in Boston who were enslaved, who went for the British? We know all about that, about how they were able to be paid, excuse me, if they joined the British. So that you answered the question. I was curious about, was there anybody in Hingham or around Hingham that you learned about who may have left to go to be with the British?
I didn't come across anything like that. I mean, I think one thing that we have learned in all of our sort of Rev 250, work is that Hingham was a far more patriot side, not loyalist side town than perhaps I had heard people suggest at other times. There were some committed political loyalists. There were people like Elisha Levitt who just looked around to see who was going to pay him more money for any particular thing. It always seems, whatever the transaction was. But fewer loyalists, and I think so. One answer is that certainly may have those feelings may have been shared by the enslaved population. And keep going.
Okay. Finally, someone who can tell us about Tuttleville. That's you.
Sure. So you saw that I put a man named Caesar Humphrey on the map there. He basically lived where the dentist office is now, at the corner of Ward and High Street. It later became a black church. His his granddaughter married James Tuttle. And that sort of started the accumulation, started the accumulation of property with the Tuttle family, and later the Simpson family that became. But clearly it was an African-American community back then, because this guy, Robert Franks, that I mentioned briefly, he rented from James Tuttle. This is around 1900 back there. But Ship Street and basically to the harbor was another. It wasn't just Tony. It was down by the what? It was Fish Street is what it was actually back then. And so yeah.
Paula, do you have any more information about Juba? What happened to him?
So it's interesting. This is a little bit like Clark Kent and Superman. When Juba Freeman sort of disappears, a man named Juba Hill, an interesting name because the man who sold Juba to Benjamin Lincoln was named Hill. A man named Juba Hill all of a sudden sort of pops up in Boston and is quite a mover and a shaker. He becomes a Prince-Hall Mason, he owns a store, he does this and that. One theory, but it's only a theory at this point, is that when Juba Freeman was done his essentially 3-year indenture with General Lincoln and was ready to go, that he moved to Boston, assumed his former enslaver's name, which might have been a politically useful thing to do because there were a lot of black hills in Boston, and sort of started his chapter 2. But as I say, it's just Clark Kent and Superman because the two are never seen together. That's
probably a placeholder name. There were 4 Freemans on the list, and I assume they weren't related.
yes, the number of Black Revolutionary soldiers named Freeman is very large, and the names seem to change both ways. Fortune Freedom, who you heard me talking about, he was a fortune conant at the beginning of his military career, probably his enslaver's name. And then one day he said, enough of that, I'm Fortune Freeman now. But yes, I think
a lot of them have not had a name, a surname, and Freeman is, just descriptive.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
When you spoke about when you spoke about the 2 runaway, like you had the advertisement for the runaways, and they served. It sounded like they served with Hingham militia soldiers. Was there like a reward in the advert? Like it just seems weird that you would run away and then serve with people from the same town you just ran away from. I guess I was wondering if you kind of can give it a little bit more context.
I don't have a lot of context. I do think that probably if somebody shows up to fight in your company, turning them in may not be the highest thing, on your list. And I think there was also, something to what they say about public attitudes starting to change. Now, I thought it was interesting that somebody who's running away from slavery signs on with his enslaver's last name is he's not Piero Freeman, right? But it occurred to me that said that Piero didn't speak English very well. My guess is he might have been Cape Verdean. I think that Piero is a Portuguese name. And it could be that when he showed up and signed up, the guys all knew who he was. And so basically somebody else sort of said it's Levitt, for his last name. But no, it's interesting, and yeah, it's hard to get into other people's heads and lives. I'm sure that Piero came back to Hingham because he had a wife and child here. But how did he feel about going back to probably doing whatever it was he was doing before for Elisha Levitt, only getting paid now? Yeah, yes, it does. It's got all that language, and, people on boats should, not let them on a boat and things like that.
I have a question. You showed a lot of pay records. Black and white enlistees, were they paid the same?
I didn't see any instance in which they were paid differently.
Interesting.
So that's something that probably the Revolutionary War might have been the high point. The other was that and I think this is very important, and I didn't say before, units were integrated in a way that they weren't till, I don't know, Korea, Vietnam, certainly after World War II.
Paul, I have a quick question for you. That receipt you showed from a woman's papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society, how on earth did you find that?
That was when I was doing the work on Prince Dema.
Amazing. Thanks.
I was looking at every scrap of paper I could find.
Every scrap of paper. We got another question.
I just want to say, I think it's important to note with all this subtext about what people felt about all of this, is that in the years leading up to the revolution, let alone during the revolution, was full of rhetoric about the horror of slavery. We'll be enslaved by, Parliament and the king, and we're proud men and not slaves. And that filtered into their heads, and I think got harder to come out of their mouths as they were enslaving these people.
No, I think there's a lot to be said for that, particularly amongst these soldiers who were serving and supposedly serving for that thing. I kind of wonder what was in General Lincoln's head with this Juba deal, which, I don't know, you can read it to make it sound like it was something nefarious, but you can also read it as that he was giving this guy, his chance. Lincoln spent a lot of time hanging out with John Laurens down in South Carolina, and John Laurens, that was his plan. He wanted enslaved people to be able to essentially earn their freedom by serving in the military. In a sense, that's what Lincoln did there. And I don't know whether there's anything to that, but it's an interesting thing.
Well, Paula, amazing. Thank you so much again. Let's give Paula.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
We have a small token of our gratitude for you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you all so much for joining us. No, you're fine. And for braving the impending storm. Our next lecture in the series is a month from today, March 22nd, with David Sierri, one of the composers for the soundtrack to Ken Burns' The American Revolution. So we'll have a wonderful afternoon of insights and sound. So we hope to see you a month from today, right back here. Please join us downstairs for some refreshments. Thank you all.